Dave B Racing is 8th on Supers. Best lap is a 2:24.788. Wiremew in Hobbs is 6th. That Canadian guy from Canada in Atwood Curve is P1 on Supers. Best lap is a 1:30.588. The qualification session is at Okayama International Circuit in Okayama, Japan. That Canadian guy from Canada is P1 on Supers. Dave B Racing from New Zealand in first corner is P6 on Supers. Chris Budd from New Zealand is P2 on Supers. Wiremew is P4 on Supers. That Canadian guy in Piper is P7. Jason Short from New Zealand in Redman is P8 on Supers. Toddy Mustang from New Zealand is first on Supers. Toddy Mustang is up 13.14 in Atwood Curve. Toddy Mustang is up 13.64 in Revolver. Toddy Mustang is up 13.56 in Mike Knight corner. Toddy Mustang improved his P1 with a 1:30.960. That Canadian guy is P6. That Canadian guy improved his P3 with a 1:31.343. 0.383 off pole. Toddy Mustang in Moss S is first up 0.31. Toddy Mustang is up 0.39 in hairpin. Toddy Mustang is up 0.48 in Hobbs. Toddy Mustang is provisional pole with a 130.701. Jason Short in Mike Knight corner is 5th up 0.74. 5 minutes remaining in the session. Jason Short is provisional pole with a 130.691. Toddy Mustang in Atwood curve is P2 up 0.41. Toddy Mustang is up 0.34 in revolver. The race dictator from New Zealand in Mike Knight corner is 3rd up 0.20 on supers. Johnny Prince from New Zealand is P7 up 0.16 on supers. Toddy Mustang is provisional pole with a 130.642. Johnny Prince improved his P7 with a 132.070, 1.428 off pole. The race dictator in Moss S is P3 up 0.19. The race dictator is up 0.35 in hairpin. The race dictator is up 0.27 in red man. Toddy Mustang in Hobbs is P1 up 0.22. Toddy Mustang is provisional pole with a 130.292. The race dictator in first corner is 3rd. Dave B Racing in Atwood curve is P8 up 0.81. Toddy Mustang is P1 up 0.12. Toddy Mustang is up 0.28 in Mike Knight corner. Toddy Mustang is provisional pole with a 130.091. Dave B Racing is P8. Dave B Racing improved is P5 with a 131.256. 1.165 off pole. The Race Dictator in Moss S is P3 up 0.17 on supers. The qualifying session is now in overtime. The Race Dictator is up 0.32 in hairpin. The Race Dictator is up 0.07 in Redman. Wiremew in Redman is P4 up 0.26. Chris Butt from New Zealand is P7. Best lap is a 131.432. 1.341 off pole. That Canadian guy is P6. Best lap is a 131.343. 1.252 off pole. Jason Short in first corner is second. Best lap is a 130.691. 0.600 off pole. Broadcast bot is P20. The race session is at Okayama International Circuit in Okayama, Japan. Toddy Mustang from New Zealand is first on supers. Jason Short from New Zealand is second on supers. 20 minutes remaining in the session. Race start. The Race Dictator from New Zealand is third on supers. Jason Short in Atwood Curve is P2. The Race Dictator is P3. Jason Short in Piper is second. The Race Dictator is P3. Jason Short is P2. The race dictator in first corner is third, 0.7 behind Jason Short. The race dictator passed Jason Short for P2. Jason Short in Atwood curve is P3, 0.4 behind the race dictator. Dave B Racing from New Zealand is fourth on Supers, 0.7 behind Jason Short. Jason Short in Piper is P3, 0.6 ahead of Dave B Racing. Wiremew in Hobbs is P5 on mediums, 0.3 behind Dave B Racing. Wiremew passed Dave B Racing for fourth. Dave B Racing is fifth, 0.5 behind Wiremew. Johnny Prince from New Zealand in first corner is P6 on Supers, 1.0 behind Dave B Racing. Jason Short in Atwood curve on lap 3 is third, 0.9 behind the race dictator. The race dictator was 2.0 faster last lap. Johnny Prince from New Zealand is P6, 0.2 behind Dave B Racing. Johnny Prince passed Dave B Racing for P5. Jason Short in Piper on lap 3 is third, 0.7 behind the race dictator. Dave B Racing is sixth, 0.3 behind Johnny Prince. Jason Short on lap 3 is P3, 0.7 behind the race dictator. Dave B Racing in first corner on lap 4 is sixth, 0.6 behind Johnny Prince. 15 minutes remaining in the session. Jason Short in Atwood curve is third, 0.5 behind the race dictator. Dave B Racing is P6, 0.4 behind Johnny Prince. Jason Short from New Zealand in Piper is P3, 0.5 behind the race dictator. Dave B Racing from New Zealand in Redman is sixth, 0.4 behind Johnny Prince. Jason Short is third. Best lap is a 1:31.043. 0.650 off the fastest lap. Dave B Racing in first corner is sixth, 0.6 behind Johnny Prince. Jason Short in Atwood Curve is third on Supers, 0.6 behind the race dictator. The race dictator on lap 5 is third, 0.3 behind Jason Short. The race dictator passed Jason Short for second. Jason Short is third, 0.6 behind the race dictator. The race dictator in hairpin is P2 on Supers, 0.6 behind Toddy Mustang. Jason Short from New Zealand is third, 0.1 behind the race dictator. Wiremew in Redman is P4. Best lap is a 1:31.186. 0.793 off the fastest lap. Jason Short in last corner is third, 0.4 ahead of Wiremew. Wiremew in first corner is P4. Jason Short in Moss S on lap 6 is third, 0.3 behind the race dictator. Wiremew is P4, 0.5 ahead of Johnny Prince. The race dictator in Revolver is P3, 0.3 behind Jason Short. Wiremew in Redman is P3 on mediums, 0.1 ahead of the race dictator. The race dictator from New Zealand is P4, 0.5 behind Wiremew. Wiremew was 2.6 faster last lap. 10 minutes remaining in the session. Dave B Racing is P6, 0.7 behind Johnny Prince. The race dictator in Moss S is P4, 0.2 behind Wiremew. Dave B Racing in Atwood Curve is P6. Best lap is a 1:31.976. 1.583 off the fastest lap. Wiremew in hairpin is fourth. Dave B Racing is sixth, 0.4 ahead of Chris Budd. Wiremew in Mike Knight corner is fourth, 0.7 behind the race dictator. Dave B Racing on lap 7 is P6, 0.6 ahead of Chris Budd. Wiremew is 4th, 0.8 behind the race dictator. Johnny Prince in Atwood Curve is 6th. Best lap is a 1:31.628. 1.278 off the fastest lap. Johnny Prince lost P7 to that Canadian guy. Wiremew in Hairpin is P4, 0.9 behind the race dictator. Jason Short in Redman is 2nd on Supers, 0.9 behind Toddy Mustang. Chris Budd from New Zealand in Hops is 6th on Supers, 0.5 behind Dave B Racing. That Canadian guy from Canada on lap 8 is P7 on Supers, 0.6 behind Chris Budd. Jason Short in Moss S is 2nd, 0.6 behind Toddy Mustang. Chris Budd in Atwood Curve is P6, 0.7 ahead of that Canadian guy. Jason Short is 2nd, 0.6 behind Toddy Mustang. Chris Budd in Piper is 6th, 0.9 behind Dave B Racing. Jason Short is 2nd, 0.7 behind Toddy Mustang. That Canadian guy from Canada in last corner is 7th, 0.3 behind Chris Budd. Wiremew in Williams is P4, 0.8 behind the race dictator. 5 minutes remaining in the session. Bray entering the pits is 9th. That Canadian guy is P7, 0.3 behind Chris Budd. Wiremew in Hairpin is P4, 0.6 behind the race dictator. Jason Short in Redman is 2nd, 0.9 behind Toddy Mustang. Wiremew in Hops is P4, 0.7 behind the race dictator. Johnny Prince from New Zealand in Mike Knight corner is P8, 0.6 behind that Canadian guy. Jason Short in Moss S is P2, 1.0 behind Toddy Mustang. Wyremu in Atwood curve is P4, 0.7 behind the race dictator. Dave B racing on lap 11 is P6, 0.5 behind Chris Butt. Dave B racing past Jason Short for P2. Jason Short is third. That Canadian guy in hairpin is 7th, 0.9 behind Chris Butt. Jason Short in Revolver is 2nd. Best lap is a 1:30.350. The race dictator in Redman is 3rd, 0.4 ahead of Wyremu. Jason Short is 2nd, 0.3 behind Toddy Mustang. The race dictator in first corner is 3rd, 0.3 behind Jason Short. Jason Short in Moss S is P2, 0.5 ahead of the race dictator. The race dictator is 3rd, 0.4 behind Jason Short. Jason Short in hairpin is P2, 0.5 ahead of the race dictator. The race dictator in Redman is 3rd, 0.4 behind Jason Short. Jason Short in Mike Knight corner is P2, 0.9 ahead of the race dictator. The leader has just finished the race. Toddy Mustang finished P1. Jason Short finished 2nd. The race dictator finished P3. Dave B Racing finished P4. Wyremu finished P5. Johnny Prince finished 6th. That Canadian guy finished P7. Chris Butt finished P8. Ray finished 9th. Broadcast bot is 10th. The race session is at Okayama International Circuit in Okayama, Japan. Bray from Italy is first on mediums. 20 minutes remaining in the session. Race start. Chris Butt from New Zealand is second on supers. That Canadian guy from Canada is P3 on supers. That Canadian guy is now P2. Dave B Racing from New Zealand is third on supers. Dave B Racing is now P2. Toddy Mustang from New Zealand in Revolver is P4 on supers. Dave B Racing is P2. Jason Short from New Zealand in last corner is P4 on supers. Bray in first corner is 5th, 0.1 ahead of the race dictator. Bray lost 5th to the race dictator. Bray lost P6 to Johnny Prince. Jason Short in Atwood curve on lap 2 is P4, 0.7 behind Toddy Mustang. Johnny Prince from New Zealand is 6th on supers. Best lap is a 1:44.121. 4.673 off the fastest lap. Jason Short from New Zealand is 4th, 0.4 behind Toddy Mustang. Dave B Racing in Hobbs is P2, 0.9 behind Chris Butt. Toddy Mustang on lap 2 is P3, 0.9 behind Dave B Racing. Dave B Racing is P2, 0.5 ahead of Toddy Mustang. Toddy Mustang in Atwood curve is P3, 0.3 behind Dave B Racing. Jason Short is P4, 0.9 behind Toddy Mustang. Toddy Mustang is 3rd, 0.3 behind Dave B Racing. Jason Short is 4th, 0.5 behind Toddy Mustang. Dave B Racing in Mike Knight corner is 2nd, 0.7 behind Chris Budd. Toddy Mustang is P3, 0.6 ahead of Jason Short. 15 minutes remaining in the session. Jason Short is 4th, 0.4 behind Toddy Mustang. Dave B Racing from New Zealand is 2nd, 0.4 behind Chris Budd. Toddy Mustang in Moss S is P3, 0.4 ahead of Jason Short. Dave B Racing in Atwood Curve is 2nd, 0.1 behind Chris Budd. Dave B Racing passed Chris Budd for 1st. Toddy Mustang is P3 battling Jason Short. Jason Short was 0.8 faster last lap. Dave B Racing in Piper is 2nd, 0.5 behind Chris Budd. Toddy Mustang in Hobbs is P3, 0.6 ahead of Wiremute. Toddy Mustang is now 1st. Dave B Racing is P2, 0.2 ahead of Wiremute. The Race Dictator from New Zealand in 1st corner is P4 on Supers, 0.5 behind Dave B Racing. The Race Dictator was 2.3 faster last lap. Dave B Racing is 3rd, 0.4 ahead of the Race Dictator. The Race Dictator on lap 5 is P4, 0.2 ahead of Jason Short. The Race Dictator lost P5 to that Canadian guy. Wiremu is 2nd on mediums, 1.0 behind Toddy Mustang. Wiremu was 7.0 faster last lap. Bray entering the pits is P1. Wiremu is now P3. Jason Short is P5, 0.6 behind Dave B Racing. Jason Short was 0.9 faster last lap. The Race Dictator in last corner on lap 5 is P6, 0.6 ahead of that Canadian guy. The Race Dictator is now P5. Jason Short in 1st corner is 4th, 0.2 behind Dave B Racing. Jason Short passed Dave B Racing for P3. Wiremu in Atwood Curve is P2, 0.8 behind Toddy Mustang. Dave B Racing is 4th battling the Race Dictator. Dave B Racing lost P5 to that Canadian guy. The race dictator in Piper is P4 on supers, 0.5 ahead of that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy in Hobbs on lap 6 is 5th, 0.3 behind the race dictator. Ten minutes remaining in the session. The race dictator is 4th, 0.2 ahead of that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy in Williams is P5 on supers, 0.8 behind the race dictator. The race dictator on lap 7 is P4, 0.8 ahead of that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy is P5, 0.7 behind the race dictator. The race dictator from New Zealand in Redman is 4th, 0.3 behind Jason Short. That Canadian guy is 5th. Best lap is a 1:30.795. 0.007 off the fastest lap. The race dictator in first corner is 4th, 0.5 ahead of that Canadian guy. Jason Short in Moss S is P3, 0.8 ahead of the race dictator. The race dictator on lap 8 is P4, 0.8 ahead of that Canadian guy. Jason Short is P3, 0.8 ahead of the race dictator. The race dictator in Redman on lap 8 is P4, 0.9 behind Jason Short. Jason Short is 3rd, 0.4 behind Wiremew. That Canadian guy is 5th. Wiremew in Moss S is 3rd, 0.3 behind Jason Short. Jason Short in Atwood Curve is P2, 0.5 ahead of Wiremew. Dave B Racing is 7th, 2.7 behind Chris Budd. Chris Budd is 6th, 0.7 behind that Canadian guy. Jonathan Rosser entering the pits is P10. Jason Short is P2, 0.7 behind Toddy Mustang. Wiremew in hairpin is third, 0.5 behind Jason Short. Jason Short was 0.9 faster last lap. 5 minutes remaining in the session. Jason Short in Revolver is P2, 0.3 behind Toddy Mustang. Wiremew in Redman is third, 0.2 ahead of the Race Dictator. Jason Short from New Zealand in Mike Knight corner is P2, 0.2 behind Toddy Mustang. Wiremew is third, 0.1 behind Jason Short. Jason Short is second on Supers, 0.1 behind Toddy Mustang. Jason Short was 2.9 faster last lap. Jason Short is now P8. Wiremew in Atwood Curve is second on mediums, 0.2 behind Toddy Mustang. The Race Dictator from New Zealand in hairpin is third, 0.6 ahead of that Canadian guy. Wiremew is second. Best lap is a 1:31.071. 0.842 off the fastest lap. The Race Dictator in hops is P2, 0.1 ahead of Wiremew. The Race Dictator was 1.5 faster last lap. Jonathan Rosser exiting pits on Supers. Wiremew is P3, 0.4 ahead of that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy was 2.3 faster last lap. The Race Dictator is second on Supers, 0.5 behind Toddy Mustang. Wiremew in Atwood Curve is third, 0.3 ahead of that Canadian guy. The Race Dictator in hairpin is P2, 0.5 behind Toddy Mustang. Dave B Racing is sixth battling that Canadian guy. Dave B Racing passed that Canadian guy for fifth. The Race Dictator is P2, 0.7 behind Toddy Mustang. Wiremew in first corner is P3 on mediums, 0.9 behind the Race Dictator. The Race Dictator in Moss S is P2, 0.3 behind Toddy Mustang. Wiremew is third, 1.0 behind the race dictator. The race dictator is second on supers, 0.4 behind Toddy Mustang. Toddy Mustang in Hobbs's P1. Best lap is a 1:30.229. The leader has just finished the race. Toddy Mustang finished first. The race dictator finished P2. Wiremew finished third. Chris Butt finished P4. Dave B Racing finished P5. That Canadian guy finished 6th. Jonathan Rosser finished 10th. Jason Short finished P7. Johnny Prince is 8th. Broadcast bot is 11th. Wiremew is first.